Gaza is a strip of land just over 42 kilometers long, a narrow corridor of sand on the edge of the Mediterranean. Seen from above, it seems insignificant, a mere dash on the map between Egypt and Israel. But there's something about Gaza that makes it much larger than its geography. Because behind the concrete walls, the rockets, and the sirens, Gaza holds a history of over 3,000 years. Philistines, Hebrews, Romans, Crusaders, and caliphs have all walked there. Thousands have died there in the name of gods, flags, and unfulfilled promises. Gaza is the place where the past never ends, and the future never begins. While the world looks to Ukraine, to Taiwan, or to oil, Gaza continues to bleed silently. There's no airport, no active port, no exit. It's an open-air prison where children grow up fearing planes, and men grow old waiting for a future that never arrives. In this video you'll understand why Gaza is so small and yet so significant. You'll learn about the peoples who built and destroyed it. You'll feel the tension between faith and politics, between despair and resistance, and you'll realize why Gaza is never just about Gaza, but about the entire Middle East. Prepare to cross millennia in 42 kilometers. Welcome to Gaza, the land that time hasn't forgotten. This is sand and blood. Before rockets, fences, and drones, Gaza was already a fortress. Long before it made headlines, it was already a legend. In ancient times, this small strip of land was the stage for one of history's oldest rivalries, that of the Philistines and the Israelites. The Philistines weren't just enemies of the Hebrews, they were the symbol of what the Hebrews feared, an organized, powerful civilization with iron weapons and a distinct culture. They came from the sea, likely from the Aegean Islands, bringing superior technology and a desire to dominate the southern coast of Canaan. And there in Gaza, they established one of their 5 city-states. In the Bible, Gaza appears as one of the last bastions to be conquered. It was considered a fortified, dangerous, almost impenetrable city. It was in Gaza that Samson, the Hebrew judge, confronted the Philistines. And it was also there that, betrayed by Delilah, he had his eyes gouged out and was enslaved, a powerful metaphor for the Hebrew people subjugated by a seemingly invincible force. But the Philistines were not just warriors. They had temples, deities, a structured social system. Dagon was their principal god, half man, half fish, worshipped in rituals that frightened the Hebrews and radically differentiated them. Gaza, under the Philistines, was not just a city, but a symbol of maritime power, cultural resistance, and spiritual antagonism. This chapter of Gaza's history shows us that the dispute over this land didn't begin in the 20th century, nor with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. It began when the sea brought navigators who found in Gaza's dunes a strategic point for controlling trade routes, access to Egypt and Judea. The Philistines, however, didn't last forever. They were overcome by time, by wars, by the pressure of the Hebrew tribes, and later, by the Assyrian and Babylonian empires. But the idea of Gaza as a point of tension between civilizations was already established and would never leave. It's curious to think that the word Philistine came to be used, centuries later, as a synonym for ignorant, barbaric, someone without refinement. A historical irony, considering that the Philistines themselves were more advanced than many of their enemies. In the modern narrative, the roles are reversed, the names change, but the dynamic remains. Today, Israel still sees Gaza as a threat, and many in Gaza see themselves as heirs of those ancient sea warriors, surrounded by enemies, but determined to resist, even without temples, without iron weapons, but with the same sense of eternal siege. Thus began the chronology of the bleeding land, Gaza, where the first recorded conflict was not over oil, ideology, or foreign policy, but over survival, territory, and the eternal question, who has the right to live on this land? The answer has never been clear, and perhaps it never will be. When the clash of swords echoed over Gaza once again, the scene had already changed. The Philistines were a memory. The Hebrews were scattered, and the city walls witnessed the rise of a new world, the Islamic world. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Islam spread with impressive force and speed. Gaza was conquered by Muslim armies around 637 AD, under the caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Unlike previous conquests, the Muslim Arabs did not destroy the city. Gaza came to be respected as a holy site. According to Islamic tradition, it was the burial place of the Prophet Muhammad's grandfather. Over the following centuries, Gaza flourished as a cultural and religious Islamic center. Its mosques were erected over Byzantine ruins. Its streets became a thoroughfare for pilgrims en route to Mecca or Jerusalem. It was a time of fervent faith, but also of strategic tolerance. But the 11th century would bring a new storm, the Crusades. For the Christian Crusaders, Gaza was an obstacle, and at the same time, a prize. It was strategically positioned between Jerusalem and Egypt, and although it wasn't considered holy to Christians, taking it meant paving the way for larger campaigns. Gaza was invaded, plundered, and fiercely contested. The Crusaders built fortifications. The Muslims, under Saladin, counterattacked with fury. In 1187, after the Muslim victory at the Battle of Hattin, Gaza returned to Islamic control, but the city was already marked by centuries of violent transitions, sometimes revered, sometimes mutilated. Even so, it was during this period that Gaza solidified its identity as a borderland, a strip where the sacred and the belligerent coexist, where mosques are built over Crusader fortresses and fortresses over ancient sanctuaries. During Mamluk and later Ottoman rule, Gaza remained an important regional center. It wasn't a capital, but it was a control point for trade, pilgrimage and troop movements, and above all for resistance. It's curious to note how Gaza, even when it wasn't the main focus of empires, never ceased to be in the path of something larger, always between one empire and another, between one army and another, between one god and another. Medieval Islam saw Gaza as a spiritual link. There resided not only prophetic tradition, but also a gateway to Egypt and the Maghreb. It was a land of scholars, judges, merchants, who carried the Quran under their arm, and a sword at their belt. And even with the constant threat of Crusaders, Mongols, and internal traitors, Gaza endured, changing hands, but never disappearing. As if every stone there knew its destiny was to resist, even when there was no one to celebrate it. This era shows us that Gaza is not just conflict, it is also a symbol. For Islam it was part of Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam. For Christians, a wall to be broken. For both, something to be feared and desired. And so, the soil that had once belonged to Philistines and Hebrews came to bear yet another layer of blood. Now in the name of the cross and the crescent, Gaza became the mirror, where West and East looked at each other and did not recognize themselves. The 20th century brought with it the collapse of empires and the birth of nations. But nowhere else in the world were borders drawn with such haste and so little justice as in Palestine. And Gaza, once again, would be pushed to the center of a new maelstrom. In 1947, after decades of British rule and escalating tensions between Arabs and Jews, the UN proposed the famous partition plan for Palestine, a plan that, on paper, seemed balanced: 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab, dividing the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. But how do you divide a home where both considered themselves sole heirs? Jerusalem would be internationalized. The Jews would receive the more fertile and organized areas. For the Palestinians, a fragmented, disconnected territory would remain, and Gaza. With the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 came the first Arab-Israeli War, and with it the Exodus. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were expelled from their villages, their cities, their homes. Many found refuge in Gaza, but Gaza wasn't a home. It was an improvised shelter, surrounded by barbed wire, under Egyptian administration, far from dignity and the promise of return. What was once a coastal city transformed into a refugee camp. Tents, poverty, tension. Gaza became known not for its history, but for its tragedy. And yet the world looked to Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem, to Haifa. Gaza, the strip that was left over, seemed to be merely the refuse of the partition. The absence of a formal Palestinian state, the frustration with agreements, and the inability to return fueled what would become the flame of resistance. Gaza became the womb of revolt, a land where hope was suffocated daily, but never extinguished. The following years would bring even more pain. In 1956, Israel invaded Gaza during the Suez Crisis. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, Gaza was occupied by Israel. The refugee camps already resembled cities, but without rights, without a future. It was a suspended existence. Neither Egypt, nor Israel, nor Palestine. Gaza was an in-between place, a territory orphaned of statehood, sovereignty, and perspective. And yet children grew up there. Schools emerged there. The first Palestinian armed groups were born there. Because if the world wanted Gaza to be only silence, history had already decided it would be a cry. UN maps may have drawn lines with a ruler and ink, but Gaza has always been drawn with blood. The partition of Palestine didn't just create two peoples in conflict. It created a land that, because it was desired by no one, was inherited by all the desperate. This is the cruel irony of Gaza. Everything that was denied to it transformed it into the center. There is no peace in Jerusalem without justice in Gaza. And as long as Gaza remains merely the strip that was left over, the entire world will feel the cracks of this partition. If Gaza was once remembered for its ancient ruins and silent pain, the late 20th and early 21st centuries transformed it into a laboratory of urban warfare and digital surveillance. What was once a conflict of armies became a war of technologies and emotions. The walls grew higher. The electronic eyes became more precise, and the screams more desperate. The First Intifada began in 1987. It wasn't planned by generals. It didn't involve tanks or long-range missiles. It was a revolt of stones, an uprising of young Palestinians, many born and raised in Gaza's camps, who could no longer endure the occupation, unemployment, home demolitions, and daily humiliations at checkpoints. They faced one of the world's most well-trained armies with rocks, slingshots, and an ancestral fury. And for the first time, Western cameras began to show the other side of the conflict, the Palestinian boy against the armored soldier. The narrative shifted, but the suffering intensified. The Israeli response was harsh. Arrests, curfews, retaliations. Amidst the revolt, a new actor emerged, Hamas, an Islamic movement born in Gaza's mosques, offering not only resistance, but also social assistance, food, schools, and a promise of total liberation of Palestine by force. In the 2000s, with the Second Intifada, Gaza became synonymous with confrontation, suicide bombings in Israel, bombardments in Gaza. Each death pulled another, each attack generated a counterattack, and the cycle closed with a wall. Israel built physical and digital barriers, surrounding Gaza with concrete, electrified fences, and surveillance towers. The Strip became an experiment, controlled by drones, observed by satellites, blocked by land, air, and sea. There was no way out, nor any way in. 1.5 million people trapped in 360 square kilometers, Gaza became, in the words of the UN, the world's largest open-air prison. But what they tried to contain exploded. In 2006, Hamas won the Palestinian legislative elections. In 2007, it took control of Gaza, after violent clashes with Fatah, the other major Palestinian party. Since then, Gaza has lived under two sieges, the external one, imposed by Israel and Egypt, and the internal one, imposed by an isolated radicalized government, lacking the means to govern fully. Wars came in waves, 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, each more destructive, each with promises of an end, and none of them resolved the essential issue: 2 million people, without a recognized state, living under bombardments, power cuts, lack of potable water, and ruins that never have time to be rebuilt before the next explosion. Drones fly overhead, day and night. Children grow up without knowing the sea, though they live just meters from it. Fishermen cannot sail, farmers cannot plant near the fence, and every balloon launched becomes a reason for retaliation. Gaza doesn't live, it survives, and yet it still sings. still marries, still dreams. Because there is a mysterious strength in a people who, even when surrounded, insist on telling their story. Gaza is today the point where war has become routine, and where routine is, in itself, an act of resistance. In Gaza, the sound of missiles is no longer the only shot that defines a war. The battle now also happens in real time, on cell phone screens, global hashtags, live streams, and dramatic montages. Bombs kill bodies. Words mold consciousness. And in times of asymmetric warfare, whoever tells the story wins more than whoever shoots. It has never been easy to understand Gaza. The images that reach the West are often already filtered, edited, and interpreted. For a long time, international news outlets presented the conflict in binary terms: Israel defends itself, Palestinians attack. Or on the other side, Israel oppresses, Palestinians resist. The problem is that Gaza is more complex than any headline can summarize. With the advance of technology and social media, something changed: information decentralized. Today, any young person in Gaza with a cell phone can show the world what's happening. The drone filming for a documentary can also capture the smoke from a bombing. The video of an explosion in a hospital can be shared by millions in a matter of minutes. And each image carries an overwhelming emotional and political charge. Israel, in turn, understands the power of this symbolic war. It invests billions in public relations, international media, and coordinated campaigns to influence governments and public opinion. It has privileged access to major news outlets and enjoys the sympathy of global powers. Its narrative is sophisticated, articulated, built over decades. Gaza, isolated, responds with improvisation and pain. Its journalists operate under constant risk. Many are killed in bombings. Others face the ethical dilemma of denouncing abuses or criticizing the Hamas government itself, at the risk of internal reprisals. Still, they resist and film. They write, they publish. On social media, a new battlefield opens, that of hashtags. While politicians exchange formal statements, hashtags like #PrayForGaza, #FreePalestine, or #Stand with Israel ignite timelines, divide families, and polarize opinions. And behind each of these hashtags, there are algorithms, bots, paid campaigns, and real pain. Disinformation also spreads. Old videos are shared as if current. Images from other wars circulate as if they are from Gaza. And in the midst of the digital chaos, the common viewer gets lost, tired, confused, and aesthetized. The information war doesn't just seek to convince, it aims to wear down, exhaust, silence. But there's something that escapes the control of algorithms: the human gaze. The child covered in dust, crying alone. The father carrying his child's body. The woman kneeling amidst rubble. These images speak for themselves. They need no caption. They are living proof that, beyond geopolitics and propaganda, there is an open wound. And this is where the sand and blood channel comes in. Our role is not to take sides, but to illuminate what is obscured, to show what the official narrative doesn't show, to tell the story of the invisible, because in the information war, the greatest act of resistance is the truth, even when it's uncomfortable for all sides. Gaza is not just a military issue, it's a matter of memory, and whoever forgets Gaza will also forget the humanity that resists amidst ruins, tweets, and unheard cries. When we talk about Gaza, the most common image is one of destruction: collapsed buildings, gray smoke on the horizon, frightened children, ambulances in despair. But there is another Gaza, one that resists, not with weapons, but with flowers, with music, with improvised schools and cracked concrete corridors. This Gaza doesn't make headlines. It sprouts in silence. Amidst the siege, Gaza pulsates with life. There's a youth that, even surrounded by blockades and drones, dreams of the impossible, studying abroad, opening a cafe, writing a book. In Rafah, a 12-year-old girl recites poetry about freedom as electricity comes and goes. In Khan Yunis, a young man uses recycled waste to create solar panels that power a communal refrigerator. Small gestures that anywhere else would be trivial, but in Gaza, they are revolutions. Art is also a trench. Graffiti on bombed walls denounces the occupation, but also paints hope. a mural of a dove breaking through barbed wire fences, another of a child holding a key, a symbol of return to the Palestinian villages destroyed in 1948. In UN-era schools, despite the scarcity of materials, teachers teach math, English, history, and dignity. Because educating in Gaza is an act of faith. Even under Hamas rule, which imposes limits on cultural freedom, youth reinvents itself. Rap, theater, independent cinema, all made with cell phones, free apps, and the urgency of telling a story the world doesn't hear. They don't wait for funding. They make do with what they have. Gaza refuses to be just a statistic, and there is love. Weddings still happen, even among ruins. Mothers decorate tents for engagement parties. Children learn to dance dabki in potholed squares. It's as if the people are telling the world, you can surround us, but you won't erase us. Agriculture, despite restrictions, also survives. Farmers in Beit Lahia cultivate strawberries with adapted techniques. Families plant gardens on rooftops. Bread is baked in improvised ovens, made from pieces of broken concrete. It's the cuisine of scarcity, transformed into flavor and resistance. Even at sea, where Israel imposes strict navigation limits, there is hope. Fishing boats face daily restrictions, but still set sail. Some fishermen say that, as they cast their nets, they offer a silent prayer, not just for fish, but for freedom. There are also NGOs, many local, that offer psychological support to traumatized children. Painting workshops, listening spaces, hugs, psychologists trained within Gaza itself, treating wounds that don't bleed, but ache. This is the Gaza the world doesn't see, and it is perhaps the most important. Because showing suffering is necessary, but showing humanity is essential. The people of Gaza are not just victims, they are creators, they are builders of internal bridges, even when the world only erects external walls. When we speak of hope in Gaza, we're not talking about naive optimism, we're talking about a force that defies the logic of destruction. A child who smiles among rubble is not a miracle, it is an answer, a rebellion against the narrative that all is lost. And if the world decides to look at this Gaza, perhaps it too will begin to heal. Talking about Gaza's future is like trying to see the horizon in a sandstorm. Visibility is short. The wind stings the eyes, and yet the steps continue. Because those who live under siege learn to walk even without a road. Gaza was once a prosperous city on the spice route. It has been conquered by pharaohs, crusaders, and caliphs. It has been a refugee camp and an epicenter of digital wars. Today it is a symbol of a geopolitical impasse that the entire world observes, but few dare to resolve. Gaza's future will not be defined solely by diplomatic agreements. It will be shaped, above all, by human choices. 3 possible paths. There are 3 possible paths before us. The first is the continuation of the current situation: siege, periodic wars, slow reconstruction, and new cycles of destruction. It is the path of stagnation, where Gaza remains an orphan territory, without full statehood, without real autonomy, serving as a pressure release valve for regional tensions. A scenario that favors extremism and suffocates any chance of normality. The second path is complete collapse. Total war, the disintegration of internal social cohesion, the forced exile of its inhabitants, something many already denounce as silent ethnic cleansing. It is the scenario of the abyss, and every time a missile hits a school or a hospital, the world dangerously approaches this edge. But there is a third path, though improbable, that lives in the heart of those who still plant, sing, teach, and resist. A path where Gaza is no longer a military zone, but a zone of memory, culture, and reconstruction. Where borders are not lines of fire, but meeting points. Where the sea, currently monitored, once again becomes a route of commerce and hope. Shaping Gaza's future. This future depends on various forces, on the reconciliation between Palestinian factions, on the courage of Israeli leadership to break with expansionist policies, on real international pressure, not just diplomatic, but economic and moral. It also depends on us, on those who watch, on those who share, on those who refuse to accept that an entire people is condemned to invisibility. Gaza's future will be a mirror. If we allow it to remain as it is, we will be complicit in an era where technology evolves, but humanity regresses. If we dare to believe in a free Gaza, we will be part of the generation that preferred bridges to walls, dignity to domination. Nothing will be easy, no solution will be immediate, but every cycle of pain silently holds the embryo of a new beginning. And Gaza, with all its history of suffering, also carries the possibility of becoming a symbol of redemption. The question is, are we ready to see Gaza as more than just a conflict? Because ultimately, Gaza's future won't be decided solely by tanks and treaties. It will be decided by stories, by narratives, by voices that refuse to be silenced, and as long as someone is telling Gaza's story with honesty, a new beginning is still possible. Continue the journey with sand and blood. Did you enjoy this deep dive into Gaza's history? If this video made you reflect, question or feel, don't let this journey end here. The Sand and Blood channel was created to reveal what the news doesn't show, the behind the scenes of geopolitics, the hidden symbols of faith and war, the human stories behind the conflicts. Subscribe to the channel to receive videos that combine history, current events and spirituality with cinematic storytelling. Comment below, what part impacted you the most? Share this content with anyone who needs to understand the world beyond the headlines. Here, every video is a trench of memory, and every view is an act of resistance. Are you ready to see the Middle East with different eyes?